I'm Charlotte Davis. I'm a registered licensed dietitian, and I have the privilege of talking to you today about a very hot topic, diabetes. As a registered dietitian, I've had multiple chances to counsel people with diabetes, and since the time I began practicing in the 80s, the incidence of diabetes in the world has quadrupled. It's a huge deal and health concerns. So that's one of the reasons we chose this topic because there's so many people. More than likely, you're someone in your family or somebody in your friend group is affected by this disease. And so we want to talk to you today about how First Place for Health can help that. But we're going to do a little bit of basic training about what diabetes is, and then some things that you can do to help prevent or maybe offset the beginning of it for you. If you have annual wellness checkups, which most or hopefully you do, one of the things that almost every time they do is a fasting blood glucose level because it's a good screening tool for diabetes. And then they can move on forward with other tests if they find anything there. But just to tell you what kind of normal blood sugar is, if normal is like 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. So if you fall in that range during your wellness screen, they're probably not going to say anything. They're going to say, yay, you. But you might fall in the 101 to 125 range. And that's where what's called pre-diabetes, where you're not really diabetic, but there's a concern that you might become that way. And that, thankfully, that part is usually reversible. So that's hopefully we'll talk about some things today that will help with that if you're in that area. Pure diabetes, or the diagnosis, starts if you have a fasting blood glucose of 126 or higher. So just so you'll kind of know those numbers. But if you fall into that, they usually do continue testing with like glucose tolerance or A1C, just to try to find out what the situation has been. You've probably heard that diabetes is responsible for or can lead to major things like blindness, kidney failure, heart attack, stroke, amputations of your lower limbs, scary stuff. So that's why they screen us all for that. But there's good news. There's a huge amount of valid research that shows that it's possible to prevent or delay the onset of the most common types of diabetes, which are the prediabetes and the type 2 diabetes, with lifestyle changes. And hey, guess what? The same lifestyle changes that we advocate in First Place for Health. So the main 4 things that they recommend are maintaining a healthy body weight, let me get to my notes here, consuming a healthy diet, and getting regular physical activity. And the final one is avoiding tobacco use. So First Place for Health addresses those first 3. So we're going to talk about each one of those. The first recommended lifestyle change is maintaining a healthy weight. And in First Place for Health, we talk a whole lot about reaching and maintaining a healthy weight and how important that is for your overall health. But did you know that even just losing 10 to 15 pounds, or if you really want to calculate it, 5% of your weight, 10 to 15 pounds for many people, and keeping that off is a major, major accomplishment in preventing diabetes, if you can just do that. And the First Place for Health Live It plan has calorie levels and recommendations for calorie levels for you to follow that can promote that 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss a week at the level that's recommended, so that it stays off. And you can lose that 10 to 15 pounds in less than 2 months if you follow the plan. So it's an awesome way to make a good start on getting that 5% off of your weight. So the next recommended lifestyle change is consuming a healthy diet. And guess what? The First Place for Health Live It food plan can be a perfect way to meet that goal. We already advocate these specific guidelines from which have been shown to help prevent diabetes. Number 1, enjoying a variety of foods. So getting foods from every food group. And so we stress that in First Place for Health, not focusing on one and leaving some out. We focus on getting in all the food groups. Substituting whole grains for refined grains. We talk about that a lot, trying to get at least half and preferably more of your grains from whole grains. Eating your fruits without any added sugar. So we do that. Eat plenty of vegetables. We recommend that as well. And focusing on non-starchy vegetables versus starchy vegetables. Starchy ones are good, You may, a little bit every day, but mainly on the non-starchy vegetables. Choosing lean sources of protein and, and low fat dairy and non-fat dairy to help keep that saturated fat down in your eating. And then choosing healthier fats, things like nuts and seeds and avocado and olive oil. All these things that I just mentioned are helpful in preventing diabetes, and they're already in the first place for health food plan. So that's awesome. Some other specific guidelines that could kind of be tweaked or added to that is trying not to drink any of your calories. And that's a big thing, staying away from fruit juices as opposed to, you would rather have the whole fruit rather than the fruit juice for the blood sugar issues, and then also watching out for things like sports drinks and soft drinks and alcohol, limiting or avoiding that. Calories from beverages can really add up. So just watching that. Selecting smaller portions spread over the day. And we do recommend that in first place for health, but it becomes even more important in preventing diabetes, that you kind of spread out your food throughout the day. And then limiting foods and beverages that are high in added sugars. So rich desserts, candy, soft drinks, those kind of things that have a lot of added sugars have been shown to, increase your chance that you will go into pre-diabetes or diabetes. So I did want to show you those. There's kind of a really simple graphic here, and you can look this up online, but it's kind of like the My Plate for pre-diabetes, and it shows that half the plate is for non-starchy vegetables, and then a quarter of the plate for lean proteins, and a quarter of the plate for your carb choices. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those what falls into carb choices here in a little bit. But then it shows a 0 or no calorie beverage with that. So that's just kind of a simple way to remember how to kind of eat well and still maintain good carbohydrate control if you're pre-diabetic. The next thing, the last final number third recommendation, three-net recommendation is physical activity. I'm going to leave that to the fitness experts at First Place for Health and let them talk to you about that at Summit. But that's going to help prevent diabetes. And then the last thing is avoiding tobacco use, which we all know leads to several different health problems, including diabetes. So if you have already been diagnosed with diabetes, there are some additional factors to consider when you're planning your food intake. So let's talk a little bit about the types of diabetes. Type 1, which when I was in training years ago, they used to call it insulin-dependent diabetes. But anyway, type 1, it means your body makes no or little insulin. And it's an autoimmune disease that often begins in childhood, and the onset is like sudden. Only 5%, between 5 and 6% of adults with diabetes have type 1 diabetes, and they take insulin, for that. It cannot be prevented through diet or lifestyle, but you can manage it with diet and lifestyle. So can't do anything to prevent type 1. That's known at this point. Type 2, though, the pancreas does not make enough insulin, or the insulin that it does make doesn't help. It's like your body's just rejecting its help. And so it develops slowly. Unlike the type 1, it kind of can gradually come on. And nearly 89% of the individuals with type 2 diabetes are overweight or have a BMI above 25. So 89% of them have a BMI over 25. So that's a very key thing, and that's the reason that they want you to maintain or lose weight and maintain healthy weight. The other risk factors for type 2 diabetes are a family history of diabetes, so if it runs in your family, a history of gestational diabetes, which is the type of diabetes that you can get during pregnancy and then it goes away. Well, if you've ever had that, then that can make you more at risk for diabetes. And then also just older age makes you, and more birthdays, as Mama's pulmonologist told her yesterday, the more birthdays you have, so you can have a higher risk. And then lack of enough physical activity. In other words, if you're a couch potato or rarely active, then that can be a contributing factor to you developing diabetes. So important. A common nutrition myth about diabetes is that individuals who have it can't eat any carbs. I've heard people say that before. Oh, they can't have any carbs. But if you have diabetes, as mentioned earlier, there's a problem with the insulin used to process the blood glucose. And carbs have quite a bit of starch in them, so that converts to glucose more quickly. So how carb counting can help you ultimately depends on the type of diabetes that you have and your treatment plan. But you do not need to eliminate carbs because they're your brain's primary source of fuel. And the food sources containing carbohydrates have a lot of other nutrition in them, fiber and other things that you need that are necessary for health. So that's myth is not true. If you've ever heard you can't have carbs if you're diabetic, that is just not true. You really do need them. So mainly, if you are diabetic, your carbs do need to come from really good sources, like whole grains, fresh fruits and vegetables, beans, healthier dairy products, low fat and fat free dairy products. You need to really restrict those refined grains like white bread, saltine crackers, things like that, that immediately convert almost to glucose and doesn't give your body a chance to work on it. So you want to use those very sparingly and stay on the nutrient dense carbs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The next thing is spreading those carbs out throughout the day. Those good carbs that you're choosing need to be spread out so that your body can process them better. And an RD can work with you if you don't have one already to get a specific plan that works with your lifestyle for that. But we can discuss some kind of basics today, and that's what we're gonna. This stuff would be talked about with any diabetic who walked into the office, whether it's not as individual, but we can start with it. So type 1, since your body doesn't make insulin, you have to take insulin. And whether that's through shots or injections or a pump, your body has to have it. And the carbs that you take in need to match the carbs, need to match the insulin, or vice versa. The insulin you take is going to match the carbs that you consume. And so most people, it takes 1 unit of insulin to digest 12 to 15 grams of carbohydrate. So your plan needs to be specific, and you need to get real friendly with reading labels and looking up on like USDA's thing, like how many carbs are in an apple, which size apple, so that you know how many carbs you're getting, and then your insulin can be adjusted to that. Also, things like exercise and stress can change your needs for insulin and changes in your blood sugar. So you need to talk to your healthcare provider about what to do in those cases. So as you get more active, if you stop being the couch potato and you start doing other things, then that could change your need for insulin. So you need to make sure that you talk to them about that. Type 2 diabetes, which is the more common type and the more preventable type, is where you are resistant to insulin, but you still need to do some things with your carbs. You're not taking insulin in most cases. You might be taking an oral medication or something like that, but you do need to think about spreading those carbs out throughout the day and getting consistent amounts, like spreading it out, like breakfast, lunch, and supper would be different, kind of the same numbers, and then you might have a smaller amount in between. So they don't necessarily, if you're type 2, you don't necessarily have to count individual grams of carbs. You can do something called carb choices, and makes it a lot easier. And so I've given you in the handout, there is a handout that I've given you here that the first part of it talks about carb choices. And it tells you how much is a carb choice, and they can come from different food groups. It's not just grain. Carb choices are also fruits, dairy, so you can look at this in each food group and see what things count as a carb choice when you're planning out your meals, to kind of gear that a little bit more to your type 2 diabetes if you're on first place for health. So if you can see there, like for instance, a carb choice might be a grain, like a half a cup of cooked cereal or something like that, or a third a cup of brown rice. Those would be carb choices, but also things like a small apple or 6 ounces of yogurt. Those things count as carb choices as well. So hopefully that will help you in determining what things count as carb choices. So for instance, at breakfast, you might want to have, in first place for health, a typical breakfast might be a serving of cereal, a serving of milk, and some fruit. Okay. So all 3 of those things would count as carb choices, but you're still getting that balanced meal, and you're making choices from the food groups that first place does. So, and first place plans, the calorie levels already limit the number of servings of grains and fruits and dairy. So you're not going to go over your carbs for the day if you stay within that, and then just spreading them out is going to become the main topic. Just make sure that you spread those carb choices out throughout the day. I also wanted to mention snacks because a lot of times people say, "Well, I don't know what I should eat as a diabetic as a snack," or even other people that they don't even think they should eat snacks. But at the bottom of the handout I gave you, there's some choices for snacks on there. There are some ideas. The main focus being either to combine the carb with the protein and always used in whole grains, or just eating a protein for a snack where it doesn't have to count as a carb choice if you want to leave those at your meal. So there's things like on there like a boiled egg or, you know, that are just protein, So some ideas for that. Lastly, I want to talk about intermittent fasting a little bit. It's a growing area of research and treatment and interest in the area of diabetes and weight loss. And so I wanted to talk about it. First of all, what is it? Intermittent fasting is a term that's used to describe eating patterns that involve regularly occurring periods of fasting or very low calorie intake. Some research has shown that intermittent fasting can potentially improve several aspects of health among diabetics. So, one of the major reasons for that is that if you intermittent fasting can have that positive effect is because you usually reduce your food intake overall. And that will create weight loss. And it also supports fat loss and better control of lipids, like your cholesterol levels and all that. So it can have those positive effects. Another reason that intermittent fasting could be beneficial to people with diabetes is that when you're fasting, your body has to rely on your stored sources of glycogen, glucose in your muscles and also breaking down fat to get calories. So it helps pull that out. And so during those fasting times. A few of the most common types of intermittent fasting, there's basically three common types. The first one, which is the most recommended by physicians and is more traditional, is called time restricted feeding. And this is where you completely fast for a certain number of hours and then you consume all your food within a certain window of time during the day. A really common one that I've seen that physicians a lot of times will do is they'll say, okay, I want you to get all your food within 8 hours in the day and then fast for 16. So they might have you, okay, between 8 and 4, that's when you can eat, or between 9 and 5, that's when you can eat. So you want, it's an adjustment for many people. And for a lot of people, that cuts out that nighttime snacking that's there and that's will end up reducing their calories and kind of help their blood sugar adjust. So that's and I know my niece Cindy has her doctor has recommended they first started her on a 12-12 so she could eat between 7 and 7, and then after that she wasn't supposed to, and then as she's as things have been improving they've decreased the window a little bit. Now hers is like 10 and 14. And so different physicians do different things. But the point is to try to get your calories lowered and your blood sugars under control. The next type of intermittent fasting is called alternate day fasting. And that's where you fast for one day and then you have a regular day of eating. And it kind of goes back and forth and back and forth. Most of the time on that fasting day, it's not a complete fast. It is a 25% of your normal calorie intake. Like if you normally took in 1,600 calories, then you can only have 400. Or if you normally took in 2,000, you can only have 500 on that day. And so that one's less common, but it's out there. And then the last one is called periodic fasting, which is kind of a newer thing. And that's where they might tell you to do 5 days of regular eating and 2 days of fasting. And those 2 days might be consecutive or they might be mixed up in there. And they might be complete fasting, depending on what your provider tells you, or they might be the 25% thing, again, where you eat 25% of your norm. But that one's kind of new and there's in the research progress right now. I'm trying to figure out if that's any good. But I did want to mention that none of the studies on intermittent fasting are really large at this point. Some of them are valid, but the most number of participants I've seen is 75 in these. So it's not like hundreds of people have been checked yet. But there's a lot of interest in it. And there was a review of some research a while back that covered 5 studies on intermittent fasting. And it was kind of like the jury was out. It didn't really show if it was helpful or not over normal methods of controlling blood sugar and weight. So there's just not enough out there. And there are some downsides to intermittent fasting. As you can well imagine, there'd be side effects. Uh, for instance, dizziness or lightheadedness. If you get too hungry, you can have that. You can have headaches if you don't eat. Some people immediately have a headache if they go a long time without eating. And then excessive hunger, which can then set off like a cortisol release in your body, a hormone release, which can raise your blood sugar in spite of what you're trying to do. So I had a friend who was recommended on this for the time restricted eating, and he said that by the time he got to eat again, he ate so much, he was so hungry that he gained weight, and they took him off of it. So it's very individualized based on how it's going to be received. But all the research that I have mentioned shows the need for further research, and essentially says, we got to wait and see what happens with this. But I do not think this is going away, because there are so many studies happening right now, and they're getting larger and larger bodies of participants in the studies. And so I don't think that we're done hearing about this. So I wanted to let you know that that was in the works, and they may be coming out with recommendations at some point about that. In closing, I just wanted to say that I've had the blessing and privilege of leading First Place for Health groups for almost 30 years now. Next January to be 30 years. And I've had so many people that are diabetics in my class, and I've seen so many wins during that time. People who are able to lose weight, pull their blood sugars into control, go off medications. One guy was able to prevent what they thought was going to be an amputation. Several people were able to have surgeries because they lost the weight and got their blood sugar under control. So they were able to have surgeries that they really needed to have. So I know God has used First Place for Health in the life of many diabetics, and much to the delight of these people's doctors. They're just in amazement, that they were able to go off meds and all that sort of thing. So I pray that the First Place for Health program will continue to be used for the improvement of all kinds of areas of health, including diabetes, and that we can all serve the Lord better and stronger. And if you have any questions about any of this, you have a specific question, there's going to be a time period during the summit where you can ask me questions. And then also you can email me. That's why I put my email at the top of the handout. So if you don't get a chance to ask, or you're watching it later, you're not live, be sure and ask me. So thank you, and God bless.